Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be chatting about WARBREAKER. This is going to contain spoilers for the whole book, so if you haven't read it yet, probably want to hop off. At the very end, we might touch on things that have to do with other Cosmere works, but for the majority of this video, we're going to center the spoilers just on WARBREAKER. But jumping into it, we'll start with overall thoughts. And Christy, was this your first time reading WARBREAKER?
Why is it always me who starts? But no, actually, this was a reread.
Oh, okay.
When I read it, I was like, I literally did not remember anything at all. So all the reveals that happened, I was like completely blindsided as if I read it for the first time. So I guess you could count it.
That's a first time read.
Yeah.
So what did you think?
Oh, okay, so the first time that I read it, like almost 10 years ago at this point, I remember like really, really liking it because it was one of the first Sanderson books and like the first fantasy books that I ever read. And I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. This time, as I was reading it, I don't know if I was maybe feeling a bit slumpy in the beginning of October because I've been really busy this whole month. And I haven't been able to read anything. But the first half, I was thinking, like, this is not as good as I remembered it being. But then at the end, when you get to the whole Sanderland, I was like, okay, yeah, this is why I liked it so much. And overall, I still gave it a 4 stars.
Oh, good. Yay. Sarah, what did you think? I feel like you're like looking with disdain.
No, that's not what I was meaning. I love this book. So I didn't reread it for this, but I read it the only time maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I read the chapter by chapter summaries this morning, and I was like, oh my God, I should have planned this better so that I could have reread it, because I was just like, this book was so good. Like reading all of the summary, I was just like, oh my God, I just want to be reading the book right now. So I loved it.
Instead of chatting with us dumb people.
But yeah.
Jesse, what about for you? We'll go Jesse, Tori. We'll skip me and go to Sophia, and then I'll answer last.
So I did reread it. I actually did my first reread on audio with this one. So this is my first time reading it on audio, and I loved it. Like some of you know, I've started my audiobook journey like within the past couple months, and like it's taken over my life. Yeah, I know, Sophia.
I like the narrator too quite a bit for this one.
I really liked the narrator for this one, and I thought it elevated the experience. I actually enjoyed it even more, I think, on a reread than I have enjoyed any of my previous rereads. This is my 3rd reread of WARBREAKER. I feel like I find something new every time.
Yeah,
Tori, first.
This is my first time. This is my first time reading it. I loved it. I really loved it. I'm still making my way through like I'm still on like my Sanderson journey, but yeah, this was great. I love the way that you can just be dropped into this complex world, this layered magic system, and it's just really smooth storytelling. I loved Ciri and Vivenna, and just even though they didn't spend the majority of the book together, just seeing them on their like separate journeys of growth throughout the story, I loved it. I loved the quiet moments in this book between Ciri and Suspan. It was just really good. So yeah, I loved it. I love sibling dynamics and relationships in books anyway, and just seeing them grow over the course of the story separately and then come together was I thought it was perfect. I love this book.
What how would you rank it compared to other Cosmere books, with it being your first and you're kind of getting into Sanderson a little more?
I'm still in the middle of the Mistborn trilogy right now. I still have to wrap up Well of Ascension. I would actually put it, I still like Mistborn more. I would put it after Mistborn, but before Skyward and Starsight.
Okay.
In terms of his works that I've read. I haven't read Stormlight Archive, but so I'm excited to get into that. After I wrap up the Mistborn trilogy, which hopefully should be sometime in the next month or so. But this was great.
That's so exciting. You're reading Mistborn for the first time.
Yeah, I'm loving it. And I'm so slow going through it. I read book 1 last year, like last August. So
That's okay.
But,
It took me a really long time to go from the first book into finally reading the second. And then when I read the second, I'm like, what? Why did I wait so long? This is so, I like the second one a lot.
I love it. And I'm seeing a lot of things that I loved in WARBREAKER that I'm really and have been enjoying throughout Well of Ascension. He's just so good at like politics and those kind of political dynamics. I loved it. So I'm just going to stop rambling now, but it was really good.
Oh, yay. Christy, you were going to say something before we segue. Do you remember what it was?
Like I just finished it last night, but as soon as I finished it, I was already like, I want to reread it again because there are so many things that are revealed at the end. And you're like, it was like, you know, the hints were there the whole time. And you want to go back to the beginning to see where they all were. And I'm like, I want to reread
so much history. But I tabbed a lot of it, and there was just so much history. I just kept like flipping back through with each reveal that came along. It was great.
Yeah.
Sophia, I don't think you're going to stray too far from the general consensus here.
No, I actually can't remember how many times I've read this one. I want to say 3. It could be 2, but I think it's 3. And
it's surprising. I expected it to be more.
No, well, yeah, I mean, I don't love it as much as Stormlight, so there is that. I think the first time I read it, I didn't love it as much as I've enjoyed it on the rereads that I've done. And I think part of that was because I felt like I had to read WARBREAKER before reading Stormlight, when really what I wanted to do was jump into Stormlight. But no, I echo what everybody said. It's really good fun. And I think we'll get a sequel not too distant future. So that's going to be exciting.
I've seen Sanderson talk about the sequel for Elantris, and I'm like, that sounds really interesting. So a sequel to WARBREAKER would be very cool too, though, because
it already has a title. It's called Nightblood. So
should clue people in as to the focuses. I just want more Vasher. That's the only. I'm like, I like Vasher so much that I want more of him.
He's so grumpy. I love him.
I know. I do like, though, the way Vivenna, when she's kind of thinking about him versus the other people, that he is a little more rough around the edges, but he is just truthful and himself and genuine. And she actually kind of respects that he's not actually a mean person. He's just straightforward. And so I do like that about him. I mean, I like the grump. And she's not exactly sunshine. So it's not like grump sunshine. Grump and like clueless idiot come together, and then like the grump is slightly like, you gotta stop being so dumb, Vivenna. So I might have the opposite experience, Sophia, to what you described. I loved this one the first time I read it, and it actually weirdly stuck with me a lot more than I realized. So I guess I could also say I had the opposite experience as you, Christy. I remembered everything really vividly. I knew all the reveals. I knew who was betraying who. And so for me, in a way, I actually liked it less on reread. I don't think it's not good or anything like that. I just think the rereading factor was not as high as it is for some of the other Sanderson books. I think another part of it, too, for me is that in talking about other Cosmere without spoiling things, I love Kaladin. I love Vin. I have such a connection to those characters that when I've come back to their stories, even if I know some of the reveals and things like that, I just love getting to explore them even more, because there's less you have to take in with the world and the magic, and you can kind of connect to them even more. Whereas in this one, I don't feel like the character work is necessarily at the same level. They're all distinct characters, and like Tori said, they have really good growth. Vivenna, I think, maybe the most growth for me, but I wouldn't say I love any of them. It's not like I would have been sad if one of them had died, one of them did die. Lightsong dies, right? And that is sad. But I wouldn't say I was devastated the way I might have been with other characters. So I think that I enjoyed it less on reread, but I wouldn't say I think it's like, if I were to rate books, it's not like I would put the star rating at like 3 stars or something like that. I just think the reveals being so still, for whatever reason, fresh in my mind, made it not as fun. But I still agree with everything everybody said. Like, the world's so fun. These characters are fun. And Tori, actually, I want to ask, because you are reading Mistborn at the same time, the tone of this one to me is it's like the perfect amount of lightheartedness, in my opinion, when it comes to Sanderson's level, because some of his other works get really campy and silly, and then some of them, like Mistborn, are so doom and gloom So you having read, even though I know it's not Cosmere, but like Skyward, which is a little bit more on the fun side, adventurous, action-packed, and then the doom and gloom of Mistborn. How did you like the tone difference of this one?
I enjoyed it because normally I'm not the biggest fan of like humor in my sci-fi fantasy books or just like, funny or sarcastic characters. I thought this was a really good balance of, it didn't feel like total doom and gloom, but you felt like, the stakes were high. You felt like the sisters were in some really intense situations, and just that, the whole growth sequence that Vivenna has was just really intense. So I think it's a good balance between something like, Mistborn and Skyward. Definitely not like on the end of Skyward, but yeah,
right,
not too dark.
What does everybody else think of the tone of this one? Sarah, I actually kind of want to know because I think you tend to not love Sanderson's camp as much. And this one I think leans a little into that area, but not as hard.
Yeah, because I don't remember when I first read it, like having a problem with that. And especially now that I feel like he's leaned into that more with more recent books. Like comparing the two, I don't feel like it leans too far into the kind of humor that I don't like. So
right.
Yeah.
Wayne humor or
yes.
Yeah.
Slander.
I definitely think it's a good balance of not being too dark, but also not being too lighthearted either.
Especially with some of the topics, the fact that Ciri's like, oh my gosh, this massive god man is going to take me, I'll word it that way, and somehow the whole situation turns into like silly shenanigans where she's like, well, just get on with it already, because she's like uncomfortable with the the fact that I'm like, I don't know how you managed to make that not as, because it's of course weighing on her and it's something that she's like concerned about and worried about, and she's very unprepared for it. But then I feel like to not have this lean into something being extremely tragic, but not also, it didn't feel like it was dismissive of that fear. It's just the tone balanced, like you were saying, there are the darker concepts and themes balanced with the, I think Ciri is just such a sunshine, bubbly character that she kind of brings out the joy in this book.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I thought there was a really good balance in it. And we know I love the Sanderson camp. Like, the campier, the better. I love Wayne, so I will defend Wayne until my dying day. But no, I think
I like Wayne too.
Yeah! I know people like him in real life, and they're good people most of the time. Just smack them every once in a while. But I thought it was fun. I think it's a really good, like you said, it's a balance between like those like moments of like, ooh, this could get real dark. And then you have Ciri with her like super bubbly personality, or like just kind of Nightblood's comedic relief, chilling there wanting to kill some murder.
Evil.
Like, I'm gonna get the evil, and you're like, but really?
It is funny because when Light Song too is just such a ridiculous character. And it's fun to see a character that is so lighthearted, doesn't take themselves seriously, while grappling with, when you see pretty early on the person asking like, please give your breath, and you see how much it weighs on him, and it's almost like it's not quite a front, because I think he is silly, but just the fact that there is, I think he even has a line about, why is it that the sillier I behave, the more people think there is a hidden depth, and you're like, because there is.
Because there,
Light Song.
It's so hidden, even you don't know it's there.
Right?
Yeah,
like, I was so many people, even like in, I guess just like in our culture and like what we think of, like so many people, those people that you think of as like extremely funny or self-deprecating and that are always silly all the time. Most of the time, even in real life, those people are the most depressed.
Right.
Very true.
Yeah.
Sophia, I'll let you go ahead and.
Yeah, I think I vividly remember the last time I read this. I listened to the audiobook, no one's surprised. And I was commuting to work and I just kept bursting out laughing in public, which I'm very good at not doing that and just kind of chuckling internally, but I just couldn't stop myself from laughing out loud at Light Song's ridiculous antics constantly. And there's still serious moments, and the themes are very serious, but the way that it's delivered in this kind of light-hearted tone, I really enjoy.
Christy, what do you think?
So I personally love Sanderson's humor. I love Wayne. And there are in Stormlight too, like some of my favorite moments are like the ones that had me absolutely like bursting out with laughter. And I feel like the reason why I didn't love this book as much as I did this time as I did the first time was because I just remember loving it so much the first time. Like it was one of my favorites. And I don't know, I just didn't really get that feeling again this time. And I think part of it is because I did find, okay, Lightsong, he's great as a character, but some of the things that he says, I'm just like face palm. It annoyed me a little bit, to be honest. I still really liked him as a character. And surprisingly, though, I didn't laugh a lot in this book. And as I was reading like some of Lightsong's lines, those were the times when I was like, okay, I can see why people say that they don't like Sanderson humor when it comes to some of those scenes. But one of my favorite scenes in this book was one with Lightsong, actually, where he was like playing that disc throwing game with the other gods. And he's like, I don't even know the rules. I'm just like choosing whatever and throwing randomly. And everyone's like, how are you so good?
I do like that part.
Go sports. Yeah.
Is there a specific part you can think of that represents a line you don't think is very funny?
Or like
not
every
necessarily?
time he was talking with Blushweaver.
Oh, Blushweaver.
And then how she would like proposition him, and then he goes on all of these like tangents, and I don't know. I was just like, sometimes it's a bit too much. Like, just stop while you're ahead.
I will say, reading this again was so annoyed at Blushweaver when she called Ciri a slut. I was like,
oh my God, yes.
Right?
I was like, okay, no. And also just the fact that she's like, don't try to ruin Lightsong. I'm like, he's a guy, grown man. But like he's his own person, and you know, if he doesn't belong to you. And I just like, I don't know. That really bugged me, because not that it bugged me on like I have an issue with this. I just mean I was mad at Blushweaver for that.
Yeah.
Blushweaver
I was really thrown back by that line, because I was like, Sanderson wrote this? What?
Right?
Yeah, so that part I was just like, how dare you, Blushweaver? Because I really like Ciri a lot. So I was very frustrated.
I think the only like laugh out loud moment that I had, I mean, there were some really good moments, but the one laugh out loud moment, I actually had to tab it. It's when again, balanced with that really serious moment when Ciri learns that the priests have been like listening in on them. So trying to figure out and then she goes into the room and she's like, you know, I don't know if this is convincing or not, or how long this is supposed to last, but she starts imitating the sounds of what she thinks. It's so that was so unexpected. Yeah. I burst out laughing. I was like, this girl.
And then she stops after an appropriate amount of time.
Yeah, an appropriate amount of time.
Poor Sebron, though, is like, he's so one
confused.
Criticism I have is I'm like, maybe he shouldn't be approximately 50. I wish he was a little younger, not in like I have an issue with, but just like, I feel like he would be less childlike. I understand that he's not been instructed whatsoever, and I don't mind that he's unaware of certain things because no one's explained it to him, but just his general behavior did not feel very like he'd been around for that many years, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't mind him being innocent, but I wish there was just a little, because he acted much more youthful than anyway. But I did like
when he's like, we've been in the same room. How have we not had a baby yet?
That made me so. I'm like, no, this is
Ron. He's so sweet. And then Ciri, she's like, I am not having that conversation.
Right. Yeah. My favorite though was when they ate.
Oh yeah.
They started bringing in food, and he's like, well, I can't. And she's like, no. And she's just like shoving food in her mouth, and he's finally like, okay.
And you know, I know that like there's a joke about the best men are the ones written by women, but I'm like, Sebron's pretty adorable. You know, like he feels like that joke about, you know, fictional men written by women. He feels like that representation, because his like telling her like
kill you, but is actually a cinnamon roll.
Yes. And he like is so unashamed of just telling her like, you're beautiful, you're the most beautiful thing, I love you. He's so cute and like open with his feelings and stuff. So
he wasn't exposed to toxic masculinity.
Yeah, just toxic religious figures.
But
yeah, I think that the two of them really and Light Song are kind of a nice contrast to Vasher and Vivenna. We'll get into characters now because we're kind of already talking about characters. I'll just say really quick about the tone. I kind of already said it as everybody else was expressing their thoughts, that for me it's the right amount of Sanderson camp and humor. Excuse me. I think I kind of wish we had more of that. If he's writing other Cosmere books, other Cosmere standalones where he wants to kind of have more fun and have it be a little bit more playful, I wish it was about this amount. And I'm okay with him exploring a various different amount of camp and humor. I think it's good that we see such a tonal shift from one Cosmere work to the next. I just wish we had another that was kind of the same level as Warbreaker, because I think that would be really fun. But anyway, getting into the characters. So Vivenna, the first time, I remember the first time being like, girl, come on. And then,
seeing Vivenna the first time.
Seeing her growth is great. But this time around, I knew she was going to grow, but now I'm like still just as impatient because I'm like, can you just stop already? Like just pull the stick out of your butt and start to actually acclimate yourself, be logical here. So she did frustrate me again, but I do like her growth throughout. And I like that in the end, she realizes that and kind of throughout the story, she's realizing that her whole emphasis on her value was as far as what other people thought of her and how much other people valued her. That was how she determined her own value. And she didn't really ever see value in herself. She didn't really have those internal, I guess, in-depth conversations with herself or even just reflection and introspection on herself. So I like that she actually comes to realize that toward the end. And if you're going to have a character start out like her, I am glad that we actually see that growth throughout the story in a slow way. Even though I was impatient, I wanted her to get there. It takes time. So I'm glad that the book does allow us to have that time with her. Vasher, I just love Vasher. I don't really get tired of Vasher. Light Song, I actually think I agree with Christy. Like sometimes he is a little bit too ridiculous for me. But as far as the ridiculous characters go, I think we have that nice balance of where he does have that depth and he does sort of have those more serious thoughts. He just sort of hides it from everyone else. And then as we've talked about, Ciri and Cosebron are just the cutest. I love them so much. Christy, you can, because it's your favorite thing to do, is start first. I technically started first that time, but I'll let you go second.
I just remember really loving Vivenna because I think my freshest memories of it was when she experienced the growth at the end of the book. So when I went into this, I was like, yeah, I love Vivenna. She's my favorite. And then I started reading. I was like, what? This is so different from what I remembered. And I forgot that she went through all the stuff before and then only came out the way she was at the end. So I was really frustrated with her for a big portion of this book, but I still loved her in the end. I think Vivenna is still my favorite in this book because of all the growth that she goes through. I love Vasher and Nightblood as well. They are a very close second. Nightblood especially. I love Nightblood. And then Ciri and Cosebron, they're cute. I don't have any really attachment to them. I think they're just really cute when they're there, but I don't really think about them too much. But for Light Song, another one of my favorite scenes was when he found out what he actually was before he returned, and he was trying he was oh, am I a detective, or why am I so inquisitive, and trying to find out all these different things that he is not aware that he could be able to do. And then Larimar is you're not a detective or a soldier, you're just a scribe.
Yes. I love his brother.
I love him.
Yeah.
The patience of that man.
I'm telling you,
Saint.
the whole book.
I love that scene where he like, you were my brother. And I'm like, yes, I love whenever these kinds of like sibling relationships come together like that. And it makes sense that he was so investigative and inquisitive, because he was basically a forensic accountant is what he was.
Literally.
And I'm an accountant, so I will defend accountants. Like, we're not always boring.
You know, my mom is an accountant and she's delightful. She's a lot of fun. Tori, I want to go as the first time reader of WARBREAKER.
Okay, this is probably gonna sound like cheesy, but I love the entire cast. And like, just for very specific, very different reasons. I really did. I love Vivenna in this. And even in the beginning, I was like, she is not going to stay like this the whole book. Just her whole outlook, like you had mentioned, Elle, just her whole life, she saw herself and placed her value on this, this task that she was brought up for her whole life. And then a normal person, when you get out of that task, would have been like, oh, that sucks for my sister, but I'm happy I don't have to, go marry this God King and produce a child. But I loved it. I tabbed the whole sequence of events with her when Vasher found her and she was in the alley and scrounging for food. I don't know. The fact to see her brought down rock bottom like that and have to fend for herself in just ways that she never thought. I really loved her character. And then Lalamar, by the end, when that reveal came that they were brothers, I was just like, this is beautiful. I loved it. I love Ciri. The whole time, Vivenna, she had it in her mind like, oh, I'm going to try to go save my sister. But really, I just am upset that I'm not as important as I thought I was. And Ciri is just immersed in court politics and just finding her way. I loved it. I really did. Lightsong, I don't dislike Lightsong. I thought he was good, but he, not my favorite of the characters. But yeah, Ciri was great. Lalamar, Vivenna, Vasher. Oh my God. So I loved all of them.
I do like that you secretly are actually watching two different sibling relationships throughout the book, and you don't really realize it. So I like that it's so much about siblings. Really quick before we get into everybody else's thoughts on the characters, way back when Sanderson had on his website, if you're asking the question where to start with the Cosmere, and he had different reasons why you can start with different ones. And for this one, he talks about if you like a little bit of romance in your stories. Do you really feel like the romance is even that big of a thing? I'm like, I mean, it's not. It's cute, but it's not.
It's not, but like Sanderson doesn't do a whole lot of romance. At least he didn't.
He didn't. Right.
I guess he does more so now, but like even I can think because of when that was, like he didn't have as much. So this might have been one of the more romance heavy.
Well, it's more of like there is more like of a sweet tenderness, whereas in like Mistborn, it's very fraught with can I trust you? And then when you decide you can trust, it's like, should I even be with you? Because whereas in this, there's actually like kind of a cute development. So I feel like even though I would not by any means consider this a fantasy romance, it still has one of my favorite romances in adult fantasy, just because of that tone we were talking about before, where you have this mix of really dire circumstances and sweet moments. And I feel like having this couple in the middle of it all be so adorable with each other is kind of, I think, why I really like the two of them so much.
Yeah, I
agree.
But Tori, I'm so glad you liked the characters so much. That's
I do. I loved it. And the romance is not even what, I don't know, while reading it, obviously, you're watching this relationship develop, but it never really stuck out to me as like, this is a big romance subplot. I don't know.
Right.
I don't think I would even recommend this if, in like these are romance or fantasy romance books you should check out. I don't know. I was so focused on just the court intrigue, the politics in this, and the things Vivenna was going through that the romance it wasn't the biggest factor for me.
And I think part of why I wanted to ask that question and tie it to the idea of the characters is that I think what I like about, ironically, even though people make fun of Sanderson's romances, what I like about them is we see the characters for who they are first. And then there is often romance that builds from there. And in other, like when we go to fantasy romance or we go to romance books or a book where there is a really obvious romantic subplot pushing things forward, I think that it is so much about the characters falling in love. It's so much about the tension, the attraction, or will they, won't they? And in this, it's like it kind of sneaks up on you. And then when looking back, you care almost more about them as a couple because you fell in love with them as characters individually.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it kind of actually works for me.
That makes sense, yeah.
Sophia. I like that tension and will they, won't they, which is why I love the romance in Mistborn. But this one was like, it was just cute. It was sweet. Yeah, I enjoyed it, but it's like not like, oh, I'm so invested in this romance and I'm getting together. For me personally,
yes, and Siri being like, "Whew, like I can't get too. I gotta be careful here."
Right.
And then
I do really like the. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I was about to have you go, and then now I'm just babbling. But I do really like too that Vivenna and Siri are very different characters, and in the end, you know, Siri realizes like I kind of like being in colorful dresses. I kind of like still letting my hair be free. And so basically her personality is reflected in how she likes to present herself. And Vivenna, even though she's opening up and changing, she is still a little bit more rigid. She is still a little bit more poised, so to speak. And so I feel like it's a similar thing where how she wants to dress, how she wants to represent herself is a reflection of who she is. And I just like that neither are initially you see where Vivenna thinks like, oh, what have they done to my sister? Right after her sister's like, I kind of like this dress.
I like this, it's so nice.
So, but
I feel
with Vivenna's growth as a character and kind of the breaking down of, do you actually believe in the things you've been taught? And she has that moment of realization of, I have become prideful in thinking that my views have made me better. And I hold on to some of these views, but when I was on the ground thinking I was going to die, I really didn't care if some of my leg was showing and things like that. I kind of like that you get to see two characters behave in ways that they actually want to be, and they show themselves as they want to show themselves. And it's not a right or wrong situation. It's just, this is who I am. This is truly what I think. And this is how I want to present myself. And I just think that that's sweet. Because we see so often in stories, especially stories with like female characters, I think there is sort of this messaging of like how women are supposed to be. And that can be true for male characters too. But I think it's nice to see two characters that it doesn't really matter. It's about like who they are. And that's the core of it. I liked that a lot in the story.
I also thought it was a really nice touch when it's like they also learn from each other, because at the end, Siri, she managed to she was able to control her hair, and then and then when when Siri saw Vivenna, she was like, Vivenna, like with blonde hair, like she let her emotions like get the best of her. So it's just like how they kind of like learn a little bit from each other.
And the balancing of emotions too. Like it's okay to be a more reserved person. It's okay to be a more hard on your sleeve person, but there's also beauty in the other side. And so us kind of in a healthy way being admirable of other people, I think that is kind of tying to what you're saying, Christy, that it's kind of nice to see that they grow from each other in, I think, like the best of ways. It doesn't feel like anybody's imposing their view on anyone else. Sophia, finally. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I echo what you all have said about the main characters. I actually want to talk about Denth and Tongfa for a second, because the very first time I read, exactly. Well, that's kind of my point. The very first time I read it, they really reminded me of a similar duo in another of my favorite series. And I'm not going to say what that series is, because in case of spoilers for that series, but they reminded me so much of them, and that made me so happy. I was like, yay, I love these characters. And then they turn out to be the bad guys, and I was devastated. Absolutely, still am. Every time I read it, I'm still like, no, why? I wish that you were just the cuties that I thought you were. So I still think that's one of his better twists, because it just gut punches me every single time I read this book. It's still exactly the same.
I feel pretty much the opposite. That's so funny. Really? I'm like, if I have to hear them say one more time, like, you know what the problem is about how people see mercenaries, and I'm just like, dude, it's just like get some more under your belt when it comes to conversation topics.
And Tongfa and all of his pets going.
Yeah,
we're going
that
missing.
dark. That twist is very dark. Where you
Yeah,
realize he like to like kill the animals and stuff.
He's like, oh no, it just went missing.
Yeah,
not good with pets.
It's not good.
It's just that simple.
That's very of mice and men.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I hate them. I think they're so annoying, and I can't stand them. To me, I'm like, oh no, I'm glad they're bad because can Vasher take care of them already?
I was so blindsided when what was it? I don't remember. Oh no, Dance was the one who revealed it. But he was like, it's like it's easiest to kidnap. Kidnapping is bad business, but it's better to make the person you kidnap think that you're following them all along and that you didn't actually kidnap them. And I was mind blown. I was like, that's ingenious.
Right?
I had little inklings about them since they were introduced, though. Like, it's just something, I don't know. Because somebody had to be bad in the story. And those spidey senses, every time I'm just like,
they were too honest.
What did you think of the Blue Fingers twist?
They were so honest.
What did you say, Elle?
Blue Fingers, what did you think of that?
That was what got me. That got me. So, I mean.
Because you think is his name pronounced, I'm totally spacing, like Teledries? What is his name?
Oh,
Prelides, thank you. I'm like, I'm missing a letter. Yeah, I feel like the whole time you're like, well, he's grumpy and mean and rude, so he's probably up to something.
Yeah.
When Cesebron was like, we should trust my priest, and you as a reader, you're like, no, you child, no. And then it turns out
Cesebron. And it turns out that he's right.
Yeah, he was right the whole time. Sorry, I just have a quick question, and I don't know if this was like ever answered in the book. It probably was, and I just missed it. But like when Ciri was investigating like why the previous God Kings died only like a short few months after their child was born. But then later, Trelides reveals that no, they just get to live out their normal lives after their breaths get taken. So like, why did the previous ones die? I still don't get it.
I think they might have actually not died and just faded into obscurity, or they were killed once because isn't it revealed that like they don't actually have kids and that they give their breaths
the kids are
to
not
the
their children,
and maybe some of them didn't know that they could maintain some of that without having to give all of it up and die. I feel like Sophia is the better person to ask.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've reread this one, so I'm actually not sure if they actually die or not.
I don't know that all of them. I'm not sure. I think it's that they didn't actually die, but everybody was it's thought that they did.
Yeah, that's what I kind of got. They were made to believe that they died, but they didn't. Because the kids weren't their kids. Like,
yeah.
It is sad when Cesebron is like, does that mean my mom wasn't my mom?
That stabbed me in the soul. Like,
the only person who ever like read him stories and talked to him.
Well, that is his mom.
That's your mom.
Yeah.
Even
I like
if
that
it's not his biological mom.
Doesn't matter.
I like that Ciri tells him that too.
Yeah.
Sarah, what are your thoughts on the characters?
I love the characters. Like, all the main characters I think are great. They might be like my favorite group of characters in the Cosmere. Yeah, I just think they're all so distinct and interesting.
We kind of dominated the conversation before. Here's our leftover scraps for you to comment on.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I love them, and yeah.
Do you have a favorite of them, or can you not pick?
I don't know if I can pick.
Maybe
really like
would be able to if you reread it.
Don't tempt me.
You just leave and start looking. We just see looking down. Yeah. The first time when I experienced Nightblood, I didn't think he was as cheery and cute as other people do. I read him a little more sinister, and then coming back to it and hearing, how he's like, let's get some evil today, and the way that the audiobook narrator does and everything, But I remember people being like, Nightblood, he's so cute and sweet. And I'm like, what? the sword that wants to kill people constantly? But hearing the different, because like, as long as it's not even the narrator, it's just how you read it.
Yeah.
If you read it as like, let's go kill, you know, like you're like, okay, well, that's a really weird sword. Yeah. But we're reading it as just like a sword with a mission. You're like, oh, he's just like wants to do good. And so that kind of segues nicely into like the magic and the world and everything. And I like, well, I don't want to say much. Sophia, why don't you kick it off for us with the magic in the world on this one?
I think I've got my head around it now because I've reread it a few times, but I think this was the most confusing magic system for me the first time that I read it, because it just feels so nebulous somehow, and there's so many rules to it, and I don't think it's as well as explained as Allomancy is. Like, because in Allomancy we can kind of have like the training sequence type scenes, right? With that, you can't really have that with the magic system in Warbreaker, because everybody's at a completely different level, and it's just really difficult to kind of follow it. So I really like it now that I understand it, but the first time I read it, I was like, okay, there's magic. Cool, carry on. I don't know what's going on though, and I'm just gonna have to go with it. So it's not my favorite Cosmere magic system for that reason, but it is really interesting, and I think it will be really interesting to see later, as in later in the Cosmere, just in general, how this particular magic system works. And I don't want to say more than that, but I think it's going to be interesting.
Christy, we'll do a normal going around this time.
I thought the magic system was so cool. One thing that makes me really sad about it, though, is that there's just like a finite number of breaths, because only one person has one, right? And then once one is gone, it's just like it disappears forever. And I know a whole thing is that like, oh, you don't need a breath to survive. Like, life is you're still a person, and you know, it doesn't change who you are if you're a drab. But it still just makes me really sad to think about that. I was surprised, though, that we actually didn't get to learn like more about the magic until like the last quarter or the last third, when Vasher like finally started to explain to Vivenna like, oh, there's like 4 different kinds. And I'm like, oh, like I thought it would be explained like a lot earlier, so I was just surprised that we're not getting it until now. But I feel like there's so much that you can do with this magic system, and if we ever get that sequel, I want to see more of like how those things are used. And like they're still doing research and finding out like what can be done. And as for Nightblood, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I love I just love Nightblood so much, because when I read it in my head, Nightblood sounds like, would you like to kill some evil today?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it seems as though we're looking at a world that they themselves don't know. The magic is a part of their lives, but they don't know the full extent of it. Whereas Allomancy, there are things to still discover, as we see in Mistborn Era 2, but it feels like there's a pretty good understanding. It's a much harder magic system in general. I think, Sophia, you describing it as nebulous is a really cool way to put it. I was just going to say it feels a lot more magical and it feels softer, which I kind of like, because so much of his other magic is so scientific almost. I think that it's a nice balance, though, because it's not so soft where it's just like cast a spell and like anything is possible, but it feels like anything is possible, and that we just haven't discovered quite yet. Kind of what you were saying, Christy, where it seems like there's so much more that we have yet to see. But yeah, I think Nightblood very much is dependent on. I certainly hear him more silly and friendly now, but the first time before I really was as involved, I think, in, you know, online fandom spaces and discussions, I was surprised to find out. I'm like, wait, it's agreed upon that he's like
oh, but then when he gets drawn, he's like, destroy.
He's like a toddler that just got too much sugar.
Yeah. Sarah, what do you think of the magic?
I love the magic in this one. I agree that like first reading it definitely was like confusing, but now that I've, especially like, I think part of the like being in the fandom kind of internet sphere has helped me understand it more, and like in other books has maybe kind of helped me understand it more as well. So like now I get it, but definitely going into it, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But I love. That's like me with a lot of things. So, I really like it. I like basically with the combination of what Christy and Elle said, like how it is limited by how many people there are and have like just each person having one breath, but also how it does feel kind of like softer magic at the same time. I really like that combination.
I think so too.
Jesse.
What do you think?
I mean, I can't think of anything like interesting or new to add. Like, because I mean, kind of same. Like, it's really interesting because, like, you know, there is only one breath per person, but like some of these people have, you know, thousands and thousands of breaths. You're like, how'd you get all those? Those all came from somewhere, from somebody at some point in time. And
The mystery of it.
yeah, like I like the mystery of it, and
it's like generational wealth.
Generational wealth. Inherited. There's like probate to go through probate. Like it's a whole thing.
Yeah, he could write a thriller where it's a family trying to decide who's going to get the breath of like the person that's about to die.
How are these taxed?
Yeah.
How is this inheritance taxed?
Yeah.
Right?
The
Like,
accountant needs to know.
The
If
former
only Light
paralegal.
Song could still keep track of this stuff.
There we go. There's our next short story.
Yeah.
But no, and definitely Nightblood. I want more information on Nightblood being made. Like I have wanted that since I read it. It's like we kind of know, but don't really have any idea how Nightblood came to be. And he is definitely like a petulant little toddler who somebody forgot to give him this Ritalin when he gets drawn. And that is coming from someone who has a 6-year-old boy who, oh my God, when he doesn't have his ADHD medication is gonna kill some evil. So
Tori, I'm curious. Do you know that this one was written kind of as a prequel to Stormlight?
I did not know that.
So what's interesting is I want a prequel to Warbreaker. So, you know, because I guess Warbreaker, if I'm remembering correctly, Sanderson had planned to just kind of like write some thoughts down, and this would be something he would do after he'd written Stormlight, but then he got so into it that he just wrote the whole thing. But what's funny is it's like, I don't think they feel that connected though. They feel very separate. And in fact, when you read Stormlight, there will be some nods, I'll say, to things in Warbreaker, but some people in the fandom are very adamant that you have to read Warbreaker before Words of Radiance, or especially before Oathbringer. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think you have to. It's either you read Warbreaker first and you see those things in Stormlight. Maybe there are even people that read Warbreaker and I'm like, they're asking, where's the tie-in? But anyway, you either see those little Easter eggs in Stormlight once you've read Warbreaker, or you read Stormlight and then you're like, wait a second, is that this over here? Christy, you raised your hand. Are you saying you didn't notice? You didn't know?
Because when I read Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, I didn't like connect it at all, because again, I just didn't remember anything from Warbreaker, I guess. I didn't even, and then I had to like have some friends explain it to me. And I'm like,
it's like one person curses, instead of saying storms, they say like colors or something like that. And someone else being
just use a lot, when they talk, they use colors to describe things a lot or something like that.
I think it's more obvious in Oathbringer than it is in Words of Radiance. Because like at Words of Radiance, it's like one line at the end. Yeah, and then by the time you're at Rhythm of War, they're like,
well, in Rhythm of War, it's basically like take off your cloak and reveal, you know.
You didn't notice. Let me spell it out for you.
Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted
to now, so like it's really obvious to me because I'm currently listening to Oathbringer.
Oh wow. I'm excited to start the Stormlight journey. So
Yay. I was just checking because I had in my head that the sequel to Warbreaker was supposed to be a bit of a prequel, and I was just double checking, and that's what the Coppermind thinks as well. So it does look like we're getting a little bit of background on Vasha and Nightblood eventually when we one day when we get that book. So
that's awesome.
Tori, you haven't had a chance to talk about the magic yet.
You know, I liked it. I do think, though, I'm going to need to reread it as well and maybe understand it a little bit more fully. I feel like, unlike Mistborn, you're just kind of dropped right in. And obviously, there's no Kelsier to explain it and take you through and really see the magic in action. So there were some things I was just like, what is the heightening? What are they talking about? How am I supposed to be picturing this? But I just enjoyed it overall. And even though there was that confusion while you're reading it, I feel like the confusion didn't take away from the actual flow of the story. Like I was still into like just the like plot in general, what was happening. But I really enjoyed the magic overall. And it just started kind of falling into place the more I kept reading. So I thought it was really cool.
Even when Vasha was explaining things, he was like, I'm not good at explaining.
Yeah, I'm not good at
asking me questions.
It just works, okay?
Yeah. It's so layered. You learn one thing about it, and then they'll mention something about the awakening, and then you learn more about how that affects inanimate objects, and then you learn more about how the different levels of heightening can influence how you see the different colors. And I was just like, this is a lot to keep track of, but I was just still kind of just rolling with it, and it was good.
I would be so annoyed if I don't remember the exact numbers, but if you need 50 breaths and you're at 49, you're like, come on. Especially as a musician, knowing you'd get perfect pitch, I'm like, dude, that would have made music school so much easier if I had perfect pitch or like dumb ear training exams. I don't know if any of you have experienced anything related to like ear training, but they'll give you the first note and then they'll play slowly something on the piano and you have to try to hear every interval. And I had a friend with perfect pitch, so she didn't have to hear the interval. She just knew the notes and would write the notes down.
It's almost cheating.
It is, yeah. But they can't help that they have perfect pitch.
I used to have exams, like piano exams, where they play like a sequence and I have to like replay that exact sequence of like, I don't know, like 10 notes or something. And I'm like, I don't even freaking know what the first note is.
Yeah, it's I don't have brutal. Pitch. But perfect pitch would be nice. Perfect pitch is a superpower. I don't understand how it's possible.
Yeah, like photographic memories.
I have like yes, exactly. I have kind of sort of relative pitch a little bit, meaning like I can, if I usually know an A on the violin or like an E, like there's something about the tone of a certain pitch on the violin has a certain quality where I can pick out the notes, but on a different instrument, not so much. And also it sometimes depends on if I know the first note, I hear the interval and I know the next note. But perfect pitch just know any note, because there'd be like traffic outside and somebody's horn would honk and they can literally be like, that was a C sharp. And you're just like, okay. Anyway, so perfect pitch would be nice if I would, reach a certain heightening. But I was going to add with the magic a couple of things. One, I really like how the view on the magic is dependent on where you are as far as your feelings toward it. And it's so ostentatious, or like breaths, though. You don't take a breath, it's your soul. Whereas in the other kingdom, it's just very expected that it's no big deal if somebody gives up their breath. And the fact that one area sees it as something that you like, if you get rid of it, then you're like when you see Vivenna talking to Jules, and she's so condescending with like, I understand why you're so bitter, and she's like, what?
What do you mean?
Yeah, so I liked that interaction and the way in which the ignorance of one place is highlighted when they really do think they're above another place. But then also on top of all of that, it's the most like vivid, colorful magic. And it's just so pretty to visualize. And I would love an animated show where like you could literally, when somebody reaches a new heightening, if suddenly it goes from kind of grayscale to bright and vivid, I think that would be so cool. So I just think that the magic system, everybody's already kind of said a lot about it that I agree with, but I just want to add those couple of things. It's just, it seems so pretty.
Yes.
It's not as dark.
Creativity that you can do with that, like if as an animated show or a movie, like it's
Yeah,
just so cool. Like imagine like into this, was it the first Spider-Verse movie? Like that's what I'm imagining, like that kind of those graphics and art.
That would be cool. And like their hair.
Yes.
Oh yeah, locks are a lot of fun.
Okay, the one thing about the hair though, one thing I just found so silly was when Siri, she had like a lot of knots in her hair and they're like trying to brush it out. She's like, oh, just cut it off. I'll just regrow it at will.
If only.
I know. That's what I was thinking. Major jealousy here.
Right.
Like if you get a bad haircut and you're like, it's fine.
We kind of understand like why they're able to do that at the end. But like the idea just sounds so silly to me.
One thing, okay, maybe I'm asking a clarification question. So I think it's Vasher that says something like, or one of the characters says something about the royal locks have to do with the fact that the royal line are descendants of, I think, like the first returned or the first God King or something like that. And then I'm like, what? Am I dumb? Like, how did that work? How did that happen? Is there only one that's been able to actually have children or something?
So they did suspect at the end, like there was like a line about like whether that was even true or not, knowing that like returned can't have children. So I think it's still unknown.
Okay. I was wondering like was no? Okay.
I think it's a maybe.
Yeah.
And there's probably a Cosmere scholar that'll see this. It's like, let me explain to all of you.
Where's Bookborn? We need her to explain it to us. And then at the end, I think Denth also, like, his hair was changing color right before he died. So I was like, oh, is he also, like, he's got the royal locks?
Yes, I remember that detail of his.
He does.
Which was, did it have to do with the level of, I don't know. That was an interesting little tidbit too. I really want to see not just Nightblood's creation, but just the backstory with Vasher and all of that. And Vasher, when they're like, "How did you hide your massive god body?" and he's like, "No, you just learn,
how did you hide your massive god body?"
The like ambiguity as always with him. I'm like, can we explain, please?
Nah.
Vasher's
like whatever.
I think in talking about the magic, we kind of started to talk about the world a little bit. Was there anything about the world anybody wanted to add anything to? Not really.
Really, no.
Kind of all together.
Yeah. One thing about the magic, though, is that it does kind of remind me of Stormlight because of like the way like they breathe it out or they breathe it in. So that's one thing that came to mind.
I like how the details, once again, kind of the contrast between the two different places, but the idea of restaurants being so foreign and Vivenna being like, how lazy are these people that they can't even make their own food?
I felt really very attacked there.
And the fact that when she walks into the slums and she's like, oh, to think my people have to live among these people around these horrible people, and then they're like, these are your people.
These are your people.
And the kind of commentary on the way, so often the voices and the groups that get buried within conflict or moving from one place to the next. One, I guess, kind of criticism, I suppose, about this is that, you know, there's the reveal that Bluefingers and his people are the ones that have been in some ways oppressed by both kingdoms, caught in the middle, and it's through their fighting that they've sort of paid the consequences, but yet nobody values them, nobody tries to care for them. And to some degree, I'm like, I wouldn't say I'm for their tactics, but I also understand why they feel the way they do. And so I kind of wish we had explored that a little more. I think it would have taken away from the reveal, but I do think the complexity of that situation and the nuance is kind of lost because it's like Bluefingers betrays them. And that's kind of it, where I'm like, this could have been a lot more like we could have really dived into it and it could have been even more political. It could have really shown how difficult the choices are, because when he's like, we'll make it look like a sacrifice. And then, you know, you're like, okay, well, you're just unreasonable. But if we'd had someone else, then I think it would have really shown, I guess, the plight of his people. And we didn't really get to see that. And it was sort of just like, oh, he's bad, so we saved the day. Everything's fine. Because if we were to get a sequel that wasn't prequel in nature, but actually directly after this, I would want to see how Ciri and Sebron and Vivenna, well, I guess Vivenna's doing her own thing, but Ciri and Sebron kind of try to remedy the issues that even led to this and start to see those people as people, and the ones that are in the slums from Vivenna and Ciri's kingdom, how are they going to help them? I get that the book has to end somewhere. I just wish it wasn't kind of so quick to resolve the issue that actually was very deep rooted.
Yeah, there is a lot there. And I like when Vivenna's like, we can bring you all back home. And they're like, but we don't want that. We left for a reason. Yeah. Oh, like why would you do that though? We'll just bring you home and everything will be fine.
She's so stupid. She's so dumb for so long. Yeah. I'm like, just open your brain up and then you'll like just try to put yourself in other people's shoes, which she does. Yeah. It's just what's sad about her is what is that phrase about like the people that have to actually go through stuff? There's like a goofy phrase, but there's some people that really don't seem to understand until they go through it themselves. And I feel like
in someone else's shoes.
She really went through the ringer.
Something like that.
Yeah. But
anyway,
she was brought down pretty low.
She was.
Yeah. Very much.
Yeah.
Tori, though. I feel like you were about to say something.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with what you were talking about, the history and the conflicts happening. There's just, I mean, the pacing of this was really good, but you can definitely tell that there's so much room to get further into the conflict between all of these different kingdoms and nations. I don't know how that would have fit in here and padded out the pacing a little bit more, but I would love to see that.
Were there any other things to do with the world or any lore or anything like that anybody else wanted to comment on?
So it turns out at the end that Vasher was both Khalad and Peacegiver. And that threw me for a loop. I was like shocked, even though it's like I've never read this book before. But like, why did he name him Khalad and there's also another person named Kaladin? Like, I'm like, it's something there.
Yeah. And
origins.
Not even having read Stormlight, just seeing other booktubers videos, I have heard the name Kaladin before, people talking about Stormlight. So I'm reading this and I'm just like, what's going on here? So I think I was thinking about that a little harder than I probably should have been, or if there was some connection.
Well, and it feels like there's a connection in some ways to the Returned and a different group of people in Stormlight. To some degree. They feel sort of similar. I'm not saying we have any facts, Tori, you're not like, but there are certain like beings that are kind of known in Stormlight as like, and then they abandoned us. And like those people, how they're able to, anyway, I don't want to say too much, but
just looking at Sophia's face, like,
Sophia is trying to remain neutral.
It looks like you're internally screaming. Like,
Sophia, you can try to vocalize what's going on in your head without spoiling Tori.
No.
Okay,
like, not enough.
I mean, I feel like that is part of the fun of the Cosmere is what is just a similarity, and then what is like actually these things are tied together. I think that's one of the fun elements of all of it. And the fact that just due to the way in which magic works from place to place, you're going to see some parallels no matter what.
I think
we'll come back in our 80s and 90s and be like, so, what didn't we know back then?
Right.
I can just imagine Sanderson in his like little cave, and he's like, I'm just gonna put this thing in here deliberately that's kind of similar, but it has actually nothing to do with anything else, and watch all the fans just like
lose it.
Yeah. A spiral.
Yeah, he can definitely mess with this.
He could.
Oh, yeah.
So were there any other additional thoughts in general after having gone into specifics about the book to wrap up our chat? How does it compare to other Cosmere books for you? Or I asked in the chat about Sunlit Man, it as a standalone, because I feel like for a long time we didn't see as many standalones in fantasy. We've seen a lot more now, but do you feel like you would prefer this actually be more books? Do you like that it's a standalone? Just in general, just any other random thoughts that you have or anything you want to throw out there.
I mean, I think it works well as a standalone within the Cosmere, but that doesn't mean I don't want more.
Well, I think that the sequels are going to be more along the companion-y type books like you get in romance, right? Like we're following different characters in the same world. So that's the sense I get. And I think it's going to stay a standalone in that sense of the word. So I think it is still a pretty good place to start with Sanderson for that reason.
I agree. I think it's a good... I know we said that you don't have to read it to read Stormlight. I do still think that it's a good intro point to Sanderson and the Cosmere as a whole, though.
Yeah, because it's more complicated than Elantris, and it's more sort of up to date in terms of his writing than Elantris is. But it's not as complicated or as much of an endeavor as the Stormlight Archive, or even Mistborn.
Interesting that you say that about Elantris. Elantris, to me, I feel more in the dark about, weirdly, than I do. I don't know why. There's something about I don't know if it's because Warbreaker feels more visual or something than Elantris, where there's like such a mystery behind. Because like the magic in Elantris feels so kind of hidden in some ways and mysterious, whereas this one, I don't know. I'm not saying I disagree necessarily.
No,
with the
I
idea.
think we've spoken before about how the fact that I find Elantris magic system much easier to understand than Warbreaker. Or I think most people it's the other way around.
I'm with Elle. I'm like the Elantris. Yeah. Maybe. Kinda, sorta.
What we were talking about where before we were saying with Warbreaker, it feels like there's more to understand with the magic. I think I feel that a lot more with the Elantris magic system.
Interesting.
Sophia.
I think it's also, though, because I'm not a visual reader, like I've spoken before about how I don't see images in my head when I read. So whether something is visual to others or not, it doesn't factor in on whether or not I'll understand something, because regardless, I won't see it.
Is that aphantasia?
Aphantasia, yeah. Do you have that too, Tori?
Slightly, because when I can recognize that, oh, this is beautiful and visual, but I'm not like sitting there like, oh, what's happening with the breath and the color? No.
Yeah.
So, I always find that so fascinating.
Me too.
Just like who's like the levels of what people see and don't see when they read.
I think I do visualize. I don't picture literally everything in detail. But I can't imagine not visualizing. So to me, it's like, what? I think it's so interesting.
Yeah. I feel like I have very low levels of visualizing.
I feel like mine's like a really high. I never really thought of it that way, but I'm like, mine I feel like is a really high level of visualizing, like full on like movie in the head.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
I can see places fine, but people are hard for me to picture. Like I can just picture like a place with like perfect details, just reading like a sentence about it. But people, I'm like, this person could look like anything.
So that's so interesting.
Faces, like their face is some kind of like mixture of eyes, nose, mouth, whatever. But like hair and like stature, that I can visualize, just like not faces. So when people do like fan casts and stuff, I'm like, okay,
yes,
that's not what I don't
capture the essence of the character.
So, like I can only picture characters when it's like something like with like Harry Potter, for example, where there's like people who play those characters. So I'm like, oh, I know who that looks like.
That is,
or if there's a ton of fan art or something. But other than that, I can't picture. Like,
I think Jade once said, I think it was about oh my gosh, I'm Shalon, sorry. I think she was saying about Shalon. She's like, I didn't even like remember that she had red hair. So when she saw fan art, she was like, that's what Shalon looks like.
But it's mentioned so often.
I know. I think it had been a bit since she'd read it, but she was that her point just being like, she so doesn't visualize the characters that it is. And what's interesting, she's a really big fan of Wheel of Time. And for me in Wheel of Time, I'm like, can we stop explaining and describing everything? But I do wonder sometimes, not saying every person who leans more toward aphantasia is the same, and obviously I'm not saying every visual reader is the same, but I wonder how it affects their reading experience. Because Sarah, you were saying you can get basically a sentence and visualize the world. I think I lean a little bit in that camp. Like, it's cool to have specifics if it ties back to the character or the culture, which I think Warbreaker does really well. But if you're just going on and on and on about whatever, I'm just like, I want to feel the wonder alongside the character, or I want to feel them like uncomfortable with how crowded it is or something like that. But if you're just describing for paragraphs and paragraphs and pages something that doesn't sound that cool, it's just like this pretty basic building or something. I'm like, what are we doing? Why are you spending so much time with this? So, and that I think
I find it annoying.
Yeah, I think being more visual for me, I'm like, I got it. But I also can see people who lean more toward not having that visual in their head. The reminders are nice to kind of, it kind of ingrains it.
I'm like, I am not going to see this whether you give me a 1-page description or a 10-page description. So can we just move on? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like it's just impossible to determine objectively if, you know, the amount of descriptions is too much or too little or things like that, because you just never know, because our brains literally are different. That it's not even just it's not just even lived experiences, it's also how everything functions for the individual. So anyway, that was kind of a weird thing to touch on, but I am curious. So Sophia, you not being as visual, we touched on the fact that with this magic system, it's maybe not as colorful and vibrant as like I'm seeing it, but do you still get that feeling? Do you find?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's apparent from the story, right, that I kind of always thought that Tesla is a little bit like the Emerald City, like it's all glitzy and there's color everywhere. So I know that, I just don't see a picture of it in my head. And also I'm so kind of, particularly with the Cosmere, I'm so immersed in the Cosmere. I've seen so much fan art and that kind of thing that it's very different now to when I first started reading the Cosmere. I didn't know anything about it, and so I didn't necessarily, I don't see anything, and I didn't necessarily appreciate it in the same way that I do now, if that makes sense.
Does it in a way come down to almost a feeling for you?
Yeah.
Like the feel of grandeur or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a very emotive person, and you know, in real life I'm an empath. Like, I take on other people's emotions really easily, so that's definitely how I experience books. And I think it's probably why I like audiobooks so much more than physically reading, because I feel more engaged with the story when I'm listening to it play out, rather than when I'm reading the words on a page, because I can really settle into the emotions of the characters and what's going on.
Have you tried the graphic audio?
I haven't. I think I've listened to some of the graphic audio of Elantris, but I haven't listened to many, although there are more of them on Scribd now, so I might, but they're just so expensive that
right.
I looked into them and I was like, oh no.
My library app, for anybody that doesn't know, I'm sure most people do, graphic audio has like a full cast and sound effects and things. My library app Hoopla has them for
they've started to go into new play. A few years ago it was literally you could only get them from graphic audio, but now they're a bit more available. So
yeah, I listened to Hope of Elantris with that, and I was like, I don't know if I like this, because when they're thinking, it's like echoey instead. I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Does it only do like, is it like a script, or does it read the whole book?
So sometimes they'll take out dialogue tags and things like that, but they will still basically read the book as it is.
I think the other listen to Star Wars books like that. And it's interesting.
It's cool.
I think the other problem I have with graphic audio is because of all of that background stuff, you can't really speed them up as much. And yeah, exactly. And I find it really difficult to process the audio at that slower speed. I need it sped up because otherwise I'm just like, okay, we've just spent 5 minutes on this sentence and I still have no idea what has been said. If I go back and listen to it at 2.5, I'm like, oh yeah, I got it now. Like, it's just how my brain works.
That is interesting. I wonder if other people really like the graphic audio for Stormlight, for example. I feel like that would be so. The cast has got to be really big for those.
I don't know. I looked into that one and I was like, oh, because I'm going to do a reread of it. I was like, oh, well, I'm going to look into the graphic audio. That sounds cool. And I looked at the price and I was like, absolutely not.
Many hours must that be?
Oh, it must be so long.
It looked like a bajillion.
Yeah.
And I was like, pass.
That's probably the exact right amount, Jess.
Like too many for me.
1 bajillion.
Exactly. And I was like, I'm a pass and just listen to it from Libro FM.
Bringing us back to Warbreaker, though, are there any other final thoughts on this one?
I have one thing, and please don't attack me for this, but I have to know. And I'm not saying that this is a thing that is actually going to happen, but I ship Vivenna and Vasher.
Oh, you're not alone in that. You're not alone even a little bit.
I'm crazy for it.
I could see that. Like towards the end, I was like, a little sprinkle there. Yeah, I could get behind it.
Especially because Nightblood's like, she's pretty invested.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Vasher's like, you don't even have eyes.
And Vasher's like,
you're a sword.
I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if there's fan fiction out there of the two of them and stuff. Yeah, you're not alone, Christy. I think a lot of people.
My friend is like, that's so weird to me because Vivenna is like in her 20s and Vasher is like 700 plus.
Oh.
I'm like, you act like you've never seen it.
If people can get on board with Bella and Edward.
Exactly. Thank you. I'm feeling so validated.
Right? Yeah, you're not alone at all. I think especially with like fae and human or vampire and human. Yeah, it's magic, you know, like it's a different world. Sarah. Sarah, what if you're like, I passionately disagree? That'd be funny. Just start arguing with Christy. I mean, that wouldn't be funny. Funny to imagine because you're both so nice. Anyway, so yeah, on that note,
my ships.
I think it would be really fun to tier rank the Cosmere couples and Cosmere ships, because there's some that aren't actually there, but people want them to be there. And I gotta say, the only one that I'm like, I mean, you can have whatever one you want in your head. That's not for me. Would probably be like Syl and Kaladin.
Oh,
that ship is always so uncomfortable to me because I'm like, I mean, she starts out as like almost a baby in like her little like incorporeal form, and he's got to explain a lot. Yeah, you didn't know it's a thing. People ship Kaladin and Syl.
No, they shouldn't,
because it's very like Peter Pan, Tinkerbell. Sort of a thing. So,
and that's a big no as well.
That's a
And now I'm not saying I judge you if you ship them, because like ships are just pure fantasy. They're not, it's fiction, you know, whatever. But that's just not. I'm like, I could never visualize. I think that would be so weird. But anyway, how fun would it be to tier rank?
That would be fun.
I can ship anything.
You need to find like the weirdest ones. What are the weirdest ones? Like
Shallan and the stick.
Oh no, that was weird. That was weird. I was gonna say like Shallan and Dalinar would be so weird because like, taboo. I mean, I can't say too much else because I don't want to spoil Tori.
Oh yeah,
that would be especially weird.
I mean, the worst thing I could think of would be like Kaladin and Adolin, because we all know.
No, I love that. I love that.
Because we all know my feelings on Adolin.
There are definitely people that are like, can Adolin, Shallan, and Kaladin be a thruple? Like lots
Absolutely
of people.
Not. Can we just
Christy's all for it.
I'm for it also. Adolin.
I've seen a lot of artwork. I've seen a lot of artwork that's like Kaladin and Adolin. They're not just, you know, it's not just a bromance. It's more.
I don't like Adolin.
I love it.
I don't love Adolin at all.
Are you going to be in the Oathbringer chat?
Yes.
Oh.
I just really dislike you.
Poor Tori. Tori, when you finish Stormlight,
everybody loves Adolin except for me, so it's fine.
And Elle.
And Elle.
And Elle.
I was good.
On
I
this
didn't
train.
bring it up. I didn't. Roger wasn't here to bring it up for anyone.
No, I love him.
I need more Cosmere under my belt.
You do. We're here to support you on that journey.
Thank you. I'm getting there.
I tell you who I didn't ship in Warbreaker was Lightsong and Blushweaver. I was like, no.
No.
No. I am not about this vibe. Can we not?
No. I do love me some Blushweaver, though.
I feel like I couldn't see him with anyone because he's he couldn't be serious for long enough. Like, you know.
He rejected a couple of her flirtations anyway. There was one point he said something along the lines of like, well, you see, I'm completely mediocre or something like that.
Yeah.
I do like when he tells her something like, well, if I'm supposed to be speechless and awestruck and blah, 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 then how could I ever possibly be able to tell you how beautiful you are or something? I do like that. Anyway, this was a lot of fun. I feel like Warbreaker being fun brought out a fun chat.
Yeah.
So this was a really good time. And Tori, I'm so glad you liked it so much.
Yeah, this was amazing.
Yay! I can't wait for you, like we're all echoing, to read more Cosmere and get your thoughts, and it'll be a lot of fun. For anybody that's read Warbreaker, feel free to elaborate on anything we said or add any other things that we didn't talk about. But now all that's left for our Cosmere read along this year would be Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, and I'm so excited for those. Yay! And then we'll be done, and then it will be 2024. So that's very exciting. But anyway, thanks everybody who's been reading along with us. It's been so much fun. Thanks to everybody who's been joining for these chats. I'm really grateful for all of you. And we'll see everybody later. Bye.
Thanks for having us.